Awesome. So as you'll hear, and as you read the book, once you read the book, which is going to be an amazing experience if you haven't, you'll see that Ali has a lot of those stories, and we'll get to hear some of them. But Ali, I think like it would be great for everyone if we can just start with like setting, a quick introduction and then a timeline of like some of these amazing adventures that you've had, so that once we dive into some topics, people know where to kind of like plug in into.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And Santiago and the 500 team has been amazing. I've known you guys for several years now. You guys were amazing partners for a failed pivot. That this startup I'm currently working on started as a sort of like an angel investing platform, demo day platform, when we were all stuck at home during COVID. And so it kind of worked really well for about a year and a half, 2 years. But when COVID ended, it kind of stopped working as well. But I think when we were working together, there are 70 different accelerators doing demo days on the platform. We moved 100 million from investors to founders in 2022, in our best year, in one calendar year. So it was working. But yeah, that's how we went. But the team has been amazing, and we've kind of stayed in touch, and I spent some time mentoring at 500 as well, with the Global Accelerator batch once a year as well. But it's nice to meet you guys also, so welcome. Thank you, Santiago, for having me. Quick introduction. Yeah, I'm a founder myself, still in the trenches, building. This is my third startup. I originally grew up in Pakistan, so I'm an immigrant like many of you, right? Came here for college, then moved to California. First startup was a company called Peanut Labs. Started off as a social network trying to compete with Facebook, and then went through a couple of pivots, and then became a B2B sort of survey ad monetization engine for virtual currency in games and apps. This is like 2005 to 2010, roughly. That company was acquired by Dynata, one of our competitors in the market research sort of survey space. Then did a company called Streamlabs, which built tools for content creators on Twitch and YouTube live streaming. So it's kind of like an Adobe for live. That one went through about 20 to 25 pivots over 9 years, and we raised, roughly $30 million for that company. That was acquired by Logitech in 2020. So 2011 to 2020. And then currently doing a startup which started off as something called Stonks, that some of you may have heard of or may even have pitched on the platform. Yeah. And that is now still going. We raised some money with A16Z, and that's still going. It's an AI. The latest pivot is AI for aviation. So private aviation, general aviation pilots here in the US.
That's awesome. And of course, like in the book, you go through like all the different iterations of each one of these companies and some of the lessons learned. Just randomly today in the morning when I was preparing for this talk, like I got distracted as many people do. And I was like I got a notification of something, and I saw a news about Allbirds, the shoes company, which is public. They announced a pivot yesterday to become an AI infra company, being a public company, and their stock went like 400% up. So like just on the announcement of like pivoting to AI infra. So I was like so funny how like if a public company that has been doing like a decade doing shoes and have like retail locations can pivot to AI infra, like you can also pivot, right? So we're gonna be talking a little bit about that. Let me read you some quotes from the book. So they are just like I have some through the talk, but like one says like they embody what Silicon Valley is all about: people who don't give up. Another one is you won't drown unless you stop swimming. Another one is startups are the same way. They reward hunger, not pedigree. And then all the advice about scaling, finding product market fit, hiring, raising money, it's all irrelevant if you cannot take a fucking beating. So with some of that context, the first question I wanted to ask you and kind of like start on some of like all these topics is, what does it really, what really matters when you're building a business?
I think staying in the game is probably the most important thing. Is too many people. Those are a great collection of quotes, by the way. Love it. You should be my publicist.
You
editor.
wrote them.
I love it. Yeah, my experience has been that um, startups, nothing I've started has finished the way it started. Of course, people get lucky, and sometimes it's a straight shot. The first idea or thing you do just blows up, and it's amazing, and it's great, good for you. But 99% of the time, there's adjustments that need to be made. If not a full pivot, uh, adjustments in how you position the product or the kind of customer. Consumer companies will sometimes become B2B or vice versa. But often people do end up pivoting, and some of the most famous companies in the world, have pivoted, right? Like Silicon Valley started with Hewlett Packard, and that wasn't a computer company. I think they were building like appliances or rice cookers or some shit. Like it was, it was. So most companies do pivot, and no business runs forever. Like even for a business that is working, like Allbirds, I think, great example, right? Like you hit a point where like suddenly it's not working anymore, right? Um, so the business is not gonna die unless you give up and you say it's over. So taking a beating is like a great skill. You know, NVIDIA, Jensen gave this talk at Stanford last year, which kind of went viral. Has anyone seen this one? Right, where he talks about, he goes on stage in front of Stanford kids. They're all super smart, Pedigree, right? Pedigree is actually a huge disadvantage when you're doing startups. And I have seen tons of people from Google, even like VPs from like Meta or Google, like, I'm going to go to a startup. If the first thing they do doesn't work, they're the first people to give up. Because they've had so much success in their life that failure just like is totally alien. Versus for you guys, you're going to try a few more times before you give up, right? So Jensen was giving this talk at Stanford where he said, I wish upon you, all of you Stanford kids, pain and suffering. And people were like laughing. But then they realized he was serious, right?
No joke.
Because you Stanford kids are at a disadvantage. Like you have had success, you've been super smart, you've gotten your way into one of the best institutions in the world. You have not known failure. And real life is all about failure. And failure, you're going to fail and fail and fail until you end up at success. And yeah, so it's I think keep going is like the number one lesson, just keep going.
So the next like piece of that I wanted to ask you is a little bit about the reality of building some of these companies, because two exits, like for me, for example, like Streamlabs is a company that I used, that I like saw like from the internet just growing, and from far away it just looks like, oh my god, like these people found like product market fit and they just built something and they grew and they had an exit, like such a great life. So tell us the reality, like how long it takes, like maybe share a couple of the tough moments or experiences that I'm sure were many. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Streamlabs, and yeah, I've dealt with a lot of shit. I have a great wife now, Sarah, but I've had a few girlfriends I've broken up with, or failed relationships, health issues, sometimes serious health issues. I didn't even drink coffee until 10 years ago, and I had all my hair and not a single white hair till like 10 years ago, and now like Streamlabs did this. Literally, Streamlabs did this. I started binge drinking coffee, and my hair went away. At first, it turned white, and then it just started going away, right? And now, literally, the other day, at some point, where were we? In Dubai, and some Uber drivers like, sir, I really like you, but I think you should go to Turkey and get a hair transplant. Literally, like, we've been, moments where like, we don't have money for payroll, right? Like the next 2 weeks, I don't know where the money is going to come from. Investors are like, just focus on growth and like we're gonna fund the next round. And we did that, and then they're like, no, we don't really want to fund this anymore, right? And then we kind of were like out of money, and we have to figure out a way to make money and cut. I've been on play. At college, we started this thing. I was an international student, immigrant, right? Had no money, broke. And so I had a scholarship where the college was paying for my meal plan, right? And so I said, okay, I'll figure out my own food. Just give me the money for the meal plan. So which is about $2,000 per semester, so $4,000 a year roughly. So I took that money, paid for servers, and then some of the money I just used to pay for ramen and eat Subway. Because they had the foot-long deal, so you get $5 foot-long, and you cut it in half, and I would eat half for lunch and half for dinner. And that's how my first year incubating the first startup started in college, right? So done a lot of shit, right? It's par for the course. Streamlabs in particular, there were a few like moments. So we had, we were doing this eSports daily fantasy kind of business, right? Where kind of like DraftKings or FanDuel for eSports, and it was working. It was $1 million a month in top line, and things were looking great. After 20 pivots, we had arrived at this point. We were doing $1 million a month. And I was like, thank God, we finally have something that's working. And we just raised a big A round with Sequoia. I think it's 12 or 16 million. This is 2015. 6 months after we raised the round, employees at FanDuel and DraftKings started cheating. So they would go on each other's websites with insider information and kind of screw their own customers and like do illegal sort of betting shit, like insider trading, basically, right? Like with Polymarket and Galchi, that's been happening recently. Yeah. Same sort of thing. So this happened in 2015. All the regulators were like, what the F? They shut the whole thing down, right? The whole industry. And so Visa, MasterCard, everyone just sort of stopped processing payments. Our revenue went from $1 million a month to zero in like 30 days. And then the regulators were like, is this betting? Is this not betting? We don't know. It's going to take years to kind of figure out. Eventually, so it was that even after hitting $1 million a month in revenue, right? Like shit like this kept happening. There were probably 3 or 4 other business ideas we did, like that hit at least $1 million a year in revenue that still went to zero. This one app we built on LinkedIn. At one point, we were the largest developers on LinkedIn. This is, again, still Streamlabs. Yeah. So part of the Streamlabs story, we built this thing called Survey Report. And it was very popular. It's kind of viral, where you would get 360 feedback on your performance anonymously from your peers on LinkedIn, right? So it's sort of a professional assessment of how you are as a person to work with, your strengths and weaknesses, anonymous, so people can give candid feedback. And it kind of blew up. I was doing 1.2 million ARR. And then LinkedIn decided to sort of change their platform policies and kill virality for all developers and shut off most of their developers. So that also went to zero. So yeah, there's a bunch of these.
That is crazy. I wanted to ask you something that sounds a little bit abstract, but of course, like in this whole journey, you might have like a very different definition than other people. And that is what is failure, right? Because like each one of these ideas that you had, like you found something, you went through it, and then suddenly something happened that just didn't pan out. But a lot of people might have stopped there, and that would have been a failure. But instead, for you found like that grit to just like continue, find the way to extend it, and so it's a little bit about like when to pivot. And if there's really a moment where you would really just stop and kind of like say like this was enough, like let's like wrap it up, and maybe I'll start a company in the future, but this is a failure, or is that something that just doesn't exist in your mind? I don't know. It's a
great question. I sometimes ask myself that too,
because I was reading the book and I was like, oh my god, like this, like this person cannot fail. Like there's no potential. But I'm sure like living it doesn't feel like that.
yeah, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like failure, chewing glass, staring into the abyss, failure, and then maybe something works. I mean, I think this experience is pretty typical for startup founders. It's like you're a cockroach. You just have to survive until you hit something that works. That's really it. And like most of the advice you see online about startups, right? Like from really sort of professional. Uh, the more professional sounding the advice is, usually the worse it is, because it doesn't accurately capture the majority of time that you will experience as a founder, right? As a founder starting from zero, right? Most of the lived experience that you're going to have in the trenches is going to be pain and suffering. And so a lot of the advice, there's almost no advice that talks about how do you survive this period. And that's why we wrote the book, is like, really, there's no advice. It's just, this is the shit I went through. You're probably going to go through something like this. Everything will be okay. Just don't give up. That's the TLDR of the book, right? It's just sort of a bunch of stories to share. Like, it's terrible and it's normal. It's par for the course. Why didn't I give up? I think part of it had to do with, like, I was not. I kind of had to make it work. I was a broke immigrant, came here for the American dream, and I didn't really have a plan B, So if I failed, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm like not very employable. I dropped out of college. I didn't even finish my college degree. My parents are like, what a waste, So I think desperation is like a huge advantage that startup founders have that large companies and incumbents or executives from large companies do not. It's actually a huge advantage for you. So you're willing to suffer, going back to pain and suffering, in a lot of ways that people who are already successful may not need to, right? That's one. Two, I had a great co-founder. Amazing. Over 20 years, it's my brother, and we've done all our startups together. There's a brief period in the middle where we were like, maybe we'll do things separately. He tried something, it didn't work, and then he kind of came back to team up with me. But it was a great relationship, and I think to a large extent, not giving up also really depends on you and your co-founder dynamics, and that's why I think doing these things, it's kind of like marriage, where you want to pick somebody that you can spend a long 10 years with, and usually it's someone you know. So a common mistake I think when people make in picking co-founders is like they try to get the best person who can do X, right? So if you're like a sales go-to-market founder and you're looking for a technical you're looking for like the best engineer who can do XYZ, right? Best at machine learning, best at mobile, best at whatever, infra, whatever, or vice versa. If you're an engineer, you want the best sales leader. I don't think those relationships last very long. So the way, I picked my co-founders was like one brother, and then my CTO was like just a friend from college, and I think it has to be someone you know. So the co-founder relationship matters. And then the third is purpose. Like, I've ended up sort of donating a lot of what I made to charity and kind of found purpose in what I do. It's funny, my partner at Sequoia, this guy who was on my board, had sold a company for like $1 billion to Google early on. And he was telling me the story. He was trying to convince me not to sell Streamlabs, right? He's like, it's terrible on the other side. Yeah, you're going to be a millionaire, but like, it's terrible. Trust me, bro. I'm like, you sold a company for $1 billion, right? What do you mean? And he's like, yeah, I sold it for $1 billion, and then I spent 2 years at home, depressed, watching Netflix and playing video games.
Wow.
And I'm like, I couldn't grok what that was until I sold it, and I was there. And I think when you're building something hard, it gives you a lot of purpose. And the moment you leave that, you lose that purpose. So anyway, just having purpose, knowing why you're doing what you're doing outside of money is a really important reason to stay in the game. Whether it's, philanthropy, whether it's some other reason, I think you've got to have a deeper reason other than just money. Even if you're just doing it for your team members, Because if money is the only reason or the main reason, like you're gonna give up.
So on the giving up part, I think you speak a lot about like energy management, and you've talked about burnout and how finding success in what you're doing actually is part of what also energizes the founders. You have a couple of different other ideas there, like creativity and fun being a force multiplier. And there's a piece that also like resonated with me on this, where you say like people who plan are usually those that don't have traction. So tell me a little bit about this relationship between the energy of the founders and how much the thing they're doing is working, and how that, and just generating energy management as a founder in general.
Yeah, the planning. Great question. So the planning part is very real, both in my own sort of experience and as well as with like all the founders I advise or angel invest in or mentor or whatever. Usually, the longer the pitch deck or the board deck, the worse the business is doing.
Huh.
Right? Like if you go to a board meeting and like the board deck is like 40 slides long and like there's all these presentations, even before anyone has said a word, you know something is wrong. Right? Versus the board meeting you go to where there's just lunch and there's no slides and you're just chilling, business is doing great. You're done in like 10 minutes and then you can just talk about other things or go for a walk. So there's a very inverse relationship between pitch decks, board decks, the amount of planning, business plans, and like how well the thing is actually working. So that part is true. Energy management. Yeah, I me and my co-founder, we call this founder energy. Dalton, is Dalton Caldwell from Y Combinator. He recently left, started a VC fund called Standard Cap, but great guy. You may have seen his YouTube series with Michael. I see a few heads saying yeah. Yes, Dalton, right? See, this is great quote. He says startups don't die when they run out of money. They die when founders run out of optimism. Right? Which is spot on. You don't need money to do a startup. All you need is this thing called, we call it founder energy, but you could call it founder optimism, you can call it something else. It's sort of this life force where you believe and you work your ass off, and all of the energy is contagious, and it keeps something going even when there's not a lot of traction, no customers like you, revenue is zero, nobody wants to invest in you, your co-founder left, some employee is filing a lawsuit, I don't know, all of these shitty things can happen, right?
Or all of them at the same time.
All of them at the same time. Like I was just, Sarah and I were driving up here and I was talking to a founder in the car this morning, and she was like, Ali, I need to raise an A. My revenue is really great, but we're just 6 people. I don't have a co-founder. But all the VCs are saying no, and I don't have the energy to do a fundraising round, but we need to fundraise. But if I leave the business will fall apart. Churn is really high, and then I can't find more hires, and we have 3 months of cash left, and all of this is happening together, right? So, yeah, I'm sure you've had this experience, right? Where I don't know if you've noticed it, or anybody in this, raise a hand if you've noticed it, is if you are having sort of a low day as a founder, right? That energy rubs off on your team members, and they start to kind of also slow down and get depressed, right? Yes, almost universal. And so your team really feeds off you and your energy, and so the founder energy, very, very important to keep the business and the team going.
So one piece that I think I think is more art than science, and maybe there's no framework or answer, but it's once you realize something is not working and you're okay, something has to change. You got in your trajectory, you've done some hard pivots that sound from the outside maybe they were pretty wild or very it was a hard change. I don't know if you have an idea of how do you find the new thing, like how do you define maybe also when is the right time to kind of like pivot, but we actually have one person in this room who's actually going through that. So like I know he will love like your your thoughts about like how do you find the next thing.
Great question, and it's sort of what prompted me to start writing the book. Other than helping founders, I would get this question a lot. Is like, when do you know when to pivot? You know, is it an art? Is it a science? Is there like a checklist? But yeah, you mentioned somebody has pivoted a few times. Yeah, what's your experience?
Yeah, like we decided to pivot last week actually. We were growing but really slow. So that's why we take the decision, but we don't have like a plan. Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
So it's kind of like a blank piece of paper kind of like moment for their startup where they can just rewrite and do anything in any industry, and they're exploring new ideas. But yeah.
Okay, not having a plan is very good. That's bullish. If you had a plan, I would be worried. um, yeah, it's when do you know how to pivot? Or when to know when to pivot, right? Um, Early on in my career, I used to be like, there must be a framework. There must be right questions and ideas and like a checklist, and so I would overanalyze this. And now I'm at the point where like we literally don't even think about this. Me and my co-founder were just like, yeah, this is dead. And the easiest way to answer this, that is sort of a mix of art and science and alchemy, is founder energy. When you feel like your founder energy is dropping, and it's been dropping for a while, a few weeks, few months, and you're just like really not excited about this thing, and you're more excited about other things, and it's been and your co-founder kind of feels the same way, and there's some external signals that are like, okay, yeah, they're validating that, then it's probably time to pivot. You can either shut the business or pivot. So founder energy is sort of the most useful heuristic. You just have to be careful of shiny object syndrome, where every month there's like something else that's more exciting. Because whatever you're working on, there's more exciting things in the industry, right? Anthropic has just released blah blah blah, and like Mythos, and like somebody raised $300 million here, and OpenAI is about to IPO, and SpaceX is Starlink, and whatever. Like there's always going to be more exciting things happening. So just watch out for shiny object syndrome. But like if you feel like the thing you're working on, you're losing energy, your customers just don't seem to get it, and you are running out of energy to keep the thing going, is the most useful heuristic. That is also the most useful heuristic to figure out what to work on next, because those two questions are interrelated. It makes pivoting a lot easier if you have a sense of what you want to do next, right? Because if you don't, then pivoting is much harder. You're not pivoting, you're just kind of like, so what do you work on next, and how do you figure that out? And again, early on in my career, I used to be like, okay, let's pull out the whiteboards, let's get the markers, let's like go through an all-nighter, let's draw squiggly diagrams, and when this diagram that, and arrow here, and like analyze this. And I don't think that works. I think picking something that's going to give you or your co-founder, or ideally both of you, more energy, even when the idea is failing, it's still giving you energy. That is a useful heuristic. So recently, we spent like for this current startup, this is also in the book, it started as Stonks but went through many iterations. All the ideas were in the fintech space, right? So we did demo days, we did pre-IPO investing into companies like SpaceX.
Insurance.
Then we did insurance. We did wills and trusts for families with kids. We did Roth IRA investing for, again, families with young kids to kind of set them up, compounding for 50 years, tax-free. All of these, so they were all in the fintech space. At some point, there's just like, user acquisition is really hard. Trust is really, really hard in the fintech space. Like, people take years before they trust a bank, and it's kind of like that level of. So we were just very jaded. And last year, we were like, okay, what do we work on next? And my co-founder had this idea 2 years ago because he's a pilot. He's like a private aviation sort of pilot, hobby pilot. AI for pilots would be cool. Nobody's kind of building that. It's a very niche market. How many pilots are there? Nobody really cares about this market. But it would be cool. There's all these problems that pilots have in the plane before they fly, after they fly. Especially when they don't have a co-pilot. It's like a single pilot plane, like a 4-seater Cessna type thing. We never really looked at it seriously, but like I was excited about AI in general. Like that's where a lot of the energy was, and we were like, F it, YOLO. This is the idea, and we're just gonna do this because it's exciting and it gives us energy, and that's how we picked it. And so all the analysis has gone out the window. Some of my investors are like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And, I hope to just go back to them with a big fat revenue number, and that will be that.
Yeah. So one thing I was really surprised reading the story is that usually in my mind when someone pivots is because they are, like trying something doesn't work. You might be low on energy. Like every potential path kind of like closes. You kind of like rest a little bit and then go like find the next thing and start. And usually I'm guessing like that's the normal kind of like path of a pivot. There's a few of the pivots that you do that were very surprising for me because like it seems that you become really good at pivoting or there's something that you've been able to find where you actually like did some of these pivots I would say like even like an aggressive way, because like there's one where you pivot to something and buy 2 companies and instantly get, a strong foot in the industry. I think like one of them doesn't work, the other one does work. But like, that's not something like, that's not a usual conversation we have when we're pivoting. It's like, hey, how about we go to a new industry, a new model, and as part of that, acquire a few companies and kind of like get started really quickly. So we'd love to know like what's your thought about, like, is that something people should be looking at more? Is it a good hack? Would you do it again?
Short answer, yes.
Okay.
So what Santiago is asking about is sort of entrepreneurship by acquisition. And I think it's a very underutilized tactic. So as a founder, you have a toolbox, you can do a bunch of things, right? This one is, I think, very little sort of, people don't really talk about it and consider it because most people just kind of get excited about building their own thing. They're like artists, right? There's a little bit of like, I'm going to create this new cool thing that nobody wants, but acquisition by entrepreneurship, sort of entrepreneurship by acquisition is like the opposite of that. Is like you buy something that's already working. And the way we got into it, the story is, I'm not a private equity guy. I've never acquired anything. But we were in this situation, again, going back to that DraftKings situation where we had raised $12 million with Sequoia and other people. And 6 months later, the business went to zero. So you had a choice. Okay. We have a lot of capital and nothing to do. And we can either spend the next few years trying. And at that point, we had already been through like 20 pivots. And you're just waiting for a hit, right? Like a 2%, 3% chance on a hit. Or could we buy something? What does that look like? What's private equity? Is that even a thing? And so it's first principles thinking, right? Like there's no rule set. It's as founders, like Elon talks about this a lot, right? Like it's first principles thinking in how you solve problems. What do you have and what can you use that to solve your problem? So we had a lot of money and nothing to do, and in interesting industry. So we acquired 2 companies, and they were both very, very different from each other, right? One was a company that was doing $5 million in revenue that we bought for $5 million in cash, profitable, throwing off cash. They were doing virtual item betting, right? In sort of the Twitch, like video gaming world. Very weird, but yeah, huge volumes. And the other one had no revenue, was doing about was sort of a tipping service for live streamers called Twitch Alerts at the time, and it was doing about 20 million a year in volume, but nobody wanted to pay them any revenue. They were making a little bit of like interchange, credit card interchange, but like, 20, 40 grand, nothing to speak of. But they had an organic growth engine that was working. And that also is what we bought for 5 million. Okay, so you had 12 million. Amazingly, at the time, I had my VC partner was like, YOLO, you raise the money to do shit with, don't sit on it, go for it. And I think if you didn't have a partner like that, it's rare. I've not found a partner like that either before or since. Like VCs tend to be very, very risk averse, gun shy. It's very hard to pivot after you raise a Series A, right? Before, like at seed, pre-seed, it's like 10x easier. But after you raise an A, you've kind of raised a lot of money and you've locked in, right, into a direction. Very hard to pivot. So hats off to this guy, Umar Hamoui. He said, yeah, go for it. You've raised money to take swings. Take the swings. And so we bought 2 companies. Within a year, one of them went to 0. Okay, so you took our cash, half of it went to one company, half of it went to the other. Okay, and within a year, one of them went to 0 because all the lawyers were like, at the time we had done like this legal opinion that said, okay, this is not betting, it's okay, it's legal. But then over time, I started to get more and more uneasy about the whole thing, and I'm like, sooner or later, this is going to come bite us in the ass. This smells like betting, looks like betting, walks like betting, even though the lawyers say it's not betting. I have a legal opinion here from 2 different law firms that says it's not betting, but this is going to blow up. And I can't build like a big venture-funded business on shaky fundamentals. So, we shut it down ourselves. So that went to 0. And we had this other thing where there was no revenue, but there was an organic growth engine that was working. And that kept working, and that worked better than we ever imagined it would. And so that 20 million grew to 40 million, grew to 100 million in payments volume a year. I think at peak, it hit about 200-ish, 150, 200 million a year in payments volume. Most live streamers on Twitch were using it. And so we grew that. We fixed a lot of things with it. We developed more tools that the same customer needed. So selling more to the same customer is a winning strategy. Like once you have a foothold, like a wedge into a customer, you can figure out their workflow and build more tools for the same customer. And that's a pretty sort of tried and tested strategy so our customers were live streamers, for example, and then we ended up building, so we had this tipping tool, but they needed a streaming software. They needed a chatbot. They needed moderation tools. They needed sponsorships, they needed merch, they needed blah, 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 right? A mobile app, like a lot of times they go to these conventions and they don't carry their computer, they're streaming off their phone, right? Like YouTube. And so we built those tools. We ended up acquiring other tools that fit those pieces where we didn't build. So that was entrepreneurship by acquisition, first principles, because we were sitting on a pile of cash and we didn't, I didn't think spending another 4 years kind of iterating and trying to find product market fit was a good idea.
That's epic. One piece I wanted to ask you was around like people. Yesterday we had a great conversation with someone who has both started a startup and managed very big companies. And he gave us like this like super like clear message about like how having the right people is like the fundamental on his kind of like framework of operating. As a startup, it's really hard to find and have the money to go and acquire the most talented people just for money. So there must be mission aligned. There must be many other things, especially on early stage when you're still in that discovery phase, and even later if you have to rebuild the company, you need people who have the grit. Then through Stonks and through your own practice, you've invested in a lot of people. So what have you learned around, how do you choose who to work with, who to invest?
Pedigree is a negative signal. um, if you have, and I see this, I've seen this sort of working with people, but also angel investing is like, the person who went to Google and who has a degree from MIT and now wants to be a startup founder has usually has odds stacked against him or her. In my experience, a lot of people feel differently. They will be like, "Yo, Stanford, take my money," For co-founders and close team members, early team members, your first few hires, uh, I think hire for energy and attitude, not skill. Skill can be learned, but all the other stuff cannot. So things like commitment, work ethic, is this person like messaging you and taking initiative at 11 p.m. on a weekend? Are they always just like super on? Do customers love them? Are they bringing energy? Are they a net add to energy or a net sort of subtract? Are they subtracting energy from you? Are they taking energy away from you at every interaction you have with them, or are they giving you energy? It's sort of also a really simple heuristic. Um, as the company grows and scales, obviously that changes, right? Like you start to look for specialists, not generalists. You start to look for particular skills, particular things. But I think in the early days, like your first few dozen people are just attitude, not skill. Don't over-index on background or skill. Like, my first CTO, his name was Prosper, right? From college, friend I knew. How did I meet him? Sophomore year, he lived across the dorm from me. He was doing computer science, and he was really good with girls. And every time I'd see there are all these women coming, leaving hearts and kisses on his door, and I was like, who is this guy? And he's an engineer, and somehow he just was like super, popular. Um, and anyway, I would share food with him, so he really liked me, and that's how we became friends. But he was not the best engineer in the world. I didn't run a process to kind of find the best engineer. He deleted our code base, exposed secret API keys. Site went down many, many times, knew nothing about sort of scaling or production code, right? And this is a fresh computer science graduate, so you don't expect them to know all these things. But he had to learn on the job, and he did, So point being, he was committed, and he put in the all-nighters when they were needed. And even when he screwed up, he said, shit, this happened, and it's okay. Shit happens. We got through it together. And I'm sure there were tons of better engineers out there, but I think hiring for attitude has always worked for me. It's never failed, and the other one has failed a lot.
So kind of like similar question, but on the investor side, there's a piece in the book that you say, chase investors, you'll get nowhere. Chase customers, and investors will chase you. Through all these different changes in strategy, in industries, like all this uncertainty, I'm sure there's been moments where you felt like, oh, if I only had more money, this would be easier. But those times are also the hardest to raise. So what have you learned around, like the right moments to raise, how to get connected, how to keep those relationships? Any advice of, like I'm sure everyone in this room is going through that same kind of thought process of oh, should I be raising, should I not be raising? And how is that something that we should be investing energy, and if so, at what moments?
Yeah, don't chase investors. And I think Paul Graham has some really great essays on this. Is if you go to sort of a site and just search fundraising, you'll see some great essays where the gist of it is, if you have a business that you really care about that's working, investors will come to you. But if you care about investors more than your business or more than your customers, then they're not gonna they're gonna be able to sniff that out, and they're not gonna want to invest in you, and you'll come across as needy and desperate and blah blah blah, right? Investors generally want to invest in founders who appear formidable and unstoppable, who have shown evidence, not just sort of what they're saying, but based on their life and their previous experiences. The founders seem to be people who can just break through walls and just keep going and just get shit done. Even if it's not startup related, right? Like surviving personal trauma. Let's say, you've had something in your family or health, or like, some crazy marathon you did where you sprained an ankle but you still finished, right? Or like experiences like that. Or like you taught yourself how to code, or you tinkered with robotics and like contributed to some open source community outside of work, and like it feels like your shit and you're unstoppable. For pre-seed and seed, that's what matters. So as a founder, what do you focus on? Yeah, just focus on your business and your customers. The investor stuff will happen, and take coffees. The team at 500 is great. They're gonna connect you to a bunch of people. Network. This place is great for networking. There's a study that personal relationships do matter, right? With angel investing, and particularly pre-seed and seed. There's a study that came out from AngelList a few years ago where they said something like 70% of all fundraising, angel investing in the world happens in the Bay Area.
Wow.
And I think now it's probably even more so than what it was 5 years ago, right? Because relationships really, angel investing is so much about trust and seeing the person and knowing them over time. You do need to build these relationships well in advance of when you need to fundraise. This just happened this week. Like, there's two founders I'm helping, and they're both trying to raise an A round, right? They both have a business with like crazy traction, and they want to just like raise a friggin' A round and get back to work, right? And they're like, why is it not happening? Why is it not happening? And one has a business with 3 million in revenue, going to, say 10 this year. One has a business, 35 million in revenue, bootstrapped, never raised any money. And they're both like, why aren't people just throwing money at us? And I think it takes time to build these relationships. So time is a component you need to think and plan for. Again, not the most important thing, but just remember, like, you are dealing with people, and people take time getting comfortable with other people, right? Nobody gets married to somebody they just met overnight. So there's this funny quote I came across, which I think it's in the book, where when investors, the first time they meet you, it's a point. It's a data point on a graph, right? The second time they meet you, 2 points make it a line, 3 points make it a curve, and then the more points you have, the better fitting the curve is from statistics, right? If you've done a little bit of math stats. So think of it that way, every time you meet with an investor over time, you're giving them more data points on you as a person, as a business, as an industry, and they're drawing a curve, and they're getting more comfortable with you in the process. And whether they invest or not, you're building that trust and comfort and information. And same thing also actually, by the way, happens post-investment with investor updates. So very, very few founders actually send regular investor updates, even if it's quarterly or annual. Like something like, in my experience, so I get investor updates from something like 300 founders, and like 70% of them don't know updates until they want to raise again.
Yeah.
Right?
We force our portfolio in LATAM, and we have like a 70-80% rate.
Still nobody listens to us.
but yeah, it's hard. It's like pulling like tooth from people.
It's pulling teeth, and it's so important to build trust.
Yeah.
right? Even when things are not working, especially when things are not working, you think that like people don't want to meet you or hear from you. No, they still would like to hear from you, even if things are not working. You're being honest, and honesty is something that's it's very valuable. I mean, this book I wrote, I and then you tell me, Santiago, but like 99% of the book is just me,
And your brother.
me and my brother just failing, and it's just incredibly raw and honest. I'm not talking about like I did this and I did that and whatever. It's just failing. I'm still failing, you know. So anyway.
Yeah,
Sorry, long answer.
let me grab up the last question on kind of like entrepreneurship in that I had, and then I have like two other that are like a little bit like different topic, but and then we can hear some questions from the founders. So one is that in the book you there's a few moments where there seems to be like some missed opportunities, like either you had continued doing something or you had done something different, like something great would have happened, and it's impossible that you would have had like made all the calls correctly. But you do make like some comments around like listening to advice from investors or other people versus maybe like from your heart and where kind of like your conviction is. I don't know if there's something like in that space that you want to share around like, how do you listen to that internal conviction sometimes, especially in the toughest moments?
Yeah. It's funny, when I wrote this book, I was like, shit, I did so many wrong things. But I put together patterns. I noticed patterns, right? And the big one was listening to my heart, not my head. So two examples there. One was, after we sold Peanut Labs, we sold it for about 30 million, and I was, young. I was really into sports cars at the time, and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna do I loved this TV show Top Gear. Remember Jeremy Clarkson?
Yes.
Right. So we started this peer-to-peer luxury sports car renting thing. Right. It was kind of like Turo or Get Around, if you've used Turo, anyone.
Yep.
But for high-end cars. So starting with sort of BMWs, Mercedes, going all the way to Ferraris, Lambos, Rolls Royce. We had like a classic 1930s Rolls Royce also. Somebody used it for a wedding. Anyway, that's amazing. What a great business. The go-to-market and customer stuff was like, we would have parties with models and photo shoots and it was like 90% guys were customers, and they loved it. And in my heart, I was like, I love this. This is great. And and it got up to about $1 million in revenue. But then we had this one incident where we got hit by a car gang, and they stole $500,000 worth of cars in one afternoon on the network. We had about 400 cars in the Bay Area on the network. We were just dealing with police and insurance and economics. It was just terrible. And so we decided to pivot out of it. But Turo has built a good business in that space, right? Get Around is not, but there were ways to kind of do it right. And I think had we stayed in that space, good things would have happened. Turo's sort of a multi-billion-dollar company now. So that was a case where I listened to my head, not my heart, and I was getting energy. I loved the space. These cars were fun and exciting, and we were doing races and all these cool events, and very viral. Anyway, the second one is. I was a gamer at the time. Still am, lifelong gamer, but I can't play anymore. I have kids.
Oh yeah, the teams.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I put together this eSports team. Right. I wasn't a player. I'm terrible. I'm like bronze. But for $15,000, I put together a bunch of kids who competed, and we owned the team, and it was one of the ideas we tested or tried. And they played in the League of Legends. Anyone familiar what League of Legends is? Yes? Okay, a few people. Good, fellow nerds. Yeah.
Yeah, MOBA games. Yeah.
And they played in the first season, LCS, and eSports was just getting started, and they were just putting together leagues, kind of like NBA, Major League Baseball or whatever, NHL, but with eSports for particular games. And League of Legends was the number one game at the time. And this team finished second in North America and went to the World Championships and represented NA, and did really well. and but there were all these problems, and it was like managing a sports thing, and everyone was telling me, this is not a venture funded software business. There's no software here. You're managing a bunch of kids, right? And we're dealing with like getting them to show up to training and like, work together and communicate. And then when they had a good season, they became really, they became famous. They got these hot groupie girlfriends and they stopped practicing and caring. And so we're dealing with like all these people things. There's no software there, right? So I sold the team for like $150,000 a year later to one of our sponsors, just kind of get rid of it so we can go back to focusing on software. A year later, a top 3 team in the LCS was worth $10 million. A year after that, a top 3 team in the LCS was worth $100 million. A year after that, a top 3 team in the LCS was worth $300 million. And transactions happened at these prices, right? They're not like just valuations. So like the owners of like the Golden State Warriors and a bunch of the other sports teams ended up buying eSports teams or buying stakes in these teams, right? And it's probably still a shit business, but you sell sponsorships against eyeballs fundamentally. But it's one of those things where I was so excited. I loved the space. I'm like, yeah, like I had so much fun cheering for our team every weekend, and they would play, and we'd go to all these big championship arenas, and like I listened to my head, not my heart. So so that is a pattern, and I think if your heart really, really says something, then it's probably worth sticking with an idea longer, even when like the metrics and everything else looks like crap.
That definitely has like the buying pizza for 12,000 Bitcoin feeling. Yeah. So
Yeah, we've done that too. My brother did. He paid for not pizza but weed with Bitcoin, and that would have been worth a few $100,000, like that puff.
yeah. Well, hopefully he got some inspiration from it. So I'll just ask like one last question. I would love to hear some questions. But in the book, there's a piece where you say, years later, I saw those 2 men in a dream I had while in college. They had a different message for me. We're saving that for our next book. Is there a sequel? Well, is it in the works?
Not yet. I think I have to like live the book, and then maybe in 10 years I'll write that. Yeah.
Because just wrapping up. I mean, like you mentioned in the book that it's supposed to be fuel for entrepreneurs, and I can tell you, like having read it, it's just like a gift, and it's fuel, and it's full of energy. And thank you so much. Yeah.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Santiago, and the whole 500 team. Thanks. It's a great group, and I honestly love how like committed and humble and amazing this group is. All your founders and all the batches, like everyone is super just heads down, humble, get shit done. So I love it.